Hello, everyone. Welcoming all of you once again to our series of expert interviews called Financially Speaking with established individuals who've broken myths about the complications and have carved their own niches, making finance work for them. Today, I'm delighted to have with us Purva Agarwal, and it gives me so much joy to welcome Purva and introduce Purva to the world today through our platform. And before we start, I'd like to, tell you about Purva and her amazing life journey. Purva is a financial analyst working in the center of London in a private equity investment advisory firm. She also keeps her writing interest alive as she's under mentorship in the editorial division of a global leading private equity publication for institutional investors. Also, she is currently enrolled as an Impact Gen talent with Kairos Society Europe, a global community of young top leaders using entrepreneurship and innovation to solve the world's greatest challenges. She has also been a business development specialist with management consultees like Samir Mittal and Associates, now taken over by the Intertrust Group from the Nordic region, and international organizations in trade and policy making, such as Global Policy Insights, AI Policy Lab, and International Trade Council India. Previously, Purva has worked in leading organizations such as BDO India and Grant Thornton, delivering risk-based internal audits, business process reviews, internal financial control review, and IT general control reviews. Now, her research is focused on M&A value creation, and she is seen working with decision makers in strategy development that paves the way for stronger research and valuation-based business models. Thank you so much, Purva, for that incredible work that you do alongside your mainstream work and more power to women like you in finance. And what a pleasure it is to have you with us. And, for all those people who find private equity and private equity advisory intriguing, this is specially for you. So thank you so much, Purva, for joining us on this series. And, I've already covered most of it, but we'd like to hear from you, about what your journey has been like in finance and how did you get into this fascinating world doing phenomenal work that you're doing?
It's a pleasure to be on this show, Neha. I think it's a really powerful platform. And I've had a look at other videos that you're doing. It's incredible because I think India really needs this sort of a platform. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that introduction. Well, talking about my journey, my early journey was something extremely regular. I did my regular BCom honors. I had an interest in finance. So simultaneously, I was doing a few certifications by National Stock Exchange of India, which kind of were an introduction for me into the vastness that finance has. So I also remember doing a winter program out of curiosity, which introduced me to equity markets and debt markets and the entire financial market. And I was overwhelmed with what kind of the number of branches that there are. So most of my early career was in Gurgaon, hustling in Gurgaon with BDO and Grant Thornton, and my perspective was just to be able to enter the finance world and realize how vast it is and where I want to go. So I just went in with that perspective in these two companies. I worked with the International Trade Council and management consulting firms, but more or less, I think all this, early life in finance gave me a chance to understand, let's say, risk advisory, what is internal financial controls, how audits are conducted with organizations, what is business development, what is corporate strategy, what do you mean by processes, what are control systems in the organization, how does IT or software really become part of your business model. So I mean, it was a great experience where I could visit various clients across industries, be it telecom, e-commerce, hospitality, big names, big corporations, and you could see them inside out. So seeing those various models, it really helped me shape a perspective about how finance really, or let's say how the corporate economics really work. And parallel to that, parallel to that corporate career in my early life, I really polished my soft skills because I was, working in leadership roles, in, leading events like Jaipur Literature Festival, which is Asia's largest festival, or it was Udaipur World Music Festival. I was a person who cannot sit idle. So it was me just going out there, exploring the world, in whatever opportunities, life gave me. And that helped me really gain very solid letter of recommendations. So from MNCs, from the Ministry of Home Affairs, and soon I think that paved a base for me to study investment banking in the UK. And yeah, I mean, that was the second innings. UK has been the second innings in a new country, beginning a career. So yeah, it was very interesting. In university, I received a gold award when it came to employability. Uh, Kind of was very concentrated on studies, so received a distinction. And now it is that, I'm using all these skills, whether it's about trade, international diplomacy, or about the processes control system, or about understanding what is risk or modeling equity, etc., in my current job profile, in the various work profiles that I hold. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to that fire, that fuel, which fuels up your early career, I think it goes on to a handful of people who make that environment around you, and who are ready to, let's say, not just take the best of what you just narrated your entire journey, but who take care of you in terms of your tantrums, your dark sides, in terms of your frustrations, which happen when you're going across that sort of an early, grinding career. So I was lucky to have really good mentors, a very, very, very good, sound, stable relationships and friendships around me. Of course, supporting parents who would let me just do what I wanted to do. So that is what my journey has been, in terms of what my early career was about.
No, it's just been transformational. And what I love about, your career trajectory is just this openness to learn and explore, which is so vital to building a career in finance, because I feel the opportunities are immense. You just have to explore them and dig them a little bit deeper, and look where that's taken you today. So, we are very fascinated with the work that you're doing today. And and we spoke before, so we know that you're working in the private equity advisory space with Mayfair Equity Advisory. Could you tell us what is private equity for people who don't really understand that concept, and what an amazing opportunity it presents to people with ideas? So just throw some light on that.
Well, specifically Mayfair Equity Advisory, we work with clients, across industries. And the thesis generally is of value creation, is of strategy. So we're just ensuring that the clients are relevant, they're sustainable, they're futuristic when it comes to their models. We are looking into their funding requirements, sourcing their requirements or investment, looking at structuring the project or the model. So the idea is to work with a few selected relationships, and then build them with high time investment, build them with progress in terms of their business plans, their projects, looking at their commercial terms, looking at their investor positioning. So we kind of manage their entire process till completion, whether it is due diligence, or, like I said, investment structuring, business structuring, equity structuring, capital raising. We have it all covered. Explaining private equity to somebody, of course, it is very important, I think, for an entrepreneur to really understand what this is, and it's just not a financial jargon. So, I mean, how do I explain it? Basically, if you're building a business and you're at an early stage, you really can't tap into commercial loans. So, a seed capital or a growth capital can be figured out from, let's say, an angel investor or a VC or a PE firm. And these investors are part of what you say private capital. It can be debt, it can be equity, it can be given to you for growing your business, or for you to be investing in your tech or in your equipment or assets. So it works like, sometimes PE firms, they buy out the entire company. They may or may not let the founder run the business, but in some cases they can buy the founder, or let's say existing investors, and then provide capital, or some in cases recapitalization for a struggling business, which is very valid for today's scenario. So, I mean, I won't go into technicality, let's say, of LBOs and stuff like that. If you want to look at technical stuff, I'm soon writing a series which will be published by Private Equity Wire, which critiques the PE model. So, people, for somebody who wants to be really going into that technicality, watch out. I would be putting that up on my LinkedIn. But other than that, I think this is what private equity is. It's fairly, very simple. It's for you to be able to tap capital and then grow your business.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And please send us the link to that post whenever that is ready. We'll add it to the video description as well for people who are interested. Because of course there are both plus and there's a lot of resonance at this point in time about the challenges that PE sort of brings. So, that will be an interesting read. Purva, we connected earlier and you mentioned about this fundamental thing that finance needs to start to be, taught to people at a younger age, and why it is important to start sooner. We all know the power of compounding, but more from a psychology perspective. We connected over the work that you're doing. Could you tell us a little bit about that amazing little side work that you're doing, and the impact that you're aspiring to achieve?
I'm very excited to share it. So it's my brainchild. I'm a very creative person and I cannot sit idle. So, I mean, the pandemic gave me a lot of time on my sleeves and it pushed me to, tap into the creativity and academic side and kind of build something which is right now work in progress. But the project is on the lines of awakening both parents and companies about the responsibility they have towards the new generation or the next generation when it comes to, let's say, currency or cash slowly becoming invisible with digital finance, digital banking. The new generation, I have seen, and what studies say as well, that they are lacking financial values. It's not me saying it, is World Bank saying it. There is more research which kind of picks up flags for me, where I think this sort of sensitization is required. A journal article which I read recently was speaking about, it was from University of Cambridge, and it was speaking about how money values and finance is something which is set by the age of 7 in a person. At the same time, another study by the Australian Financial Planning Commission says that parents don't want to speak to children at that young age about money and finance because it's such a sensitive topic, and it's kind of a tapping into your own insecurity. So they say it's a burdening topic to be speaking to children about. The product that we came up with is based on OECD INF's G20 framework, which runs across 14 countries. And we deconstruct topics there like budgeting, delayed gratification, impulse control, entrepreneurship, credit, insurance, for children in using magical animals, using color, using everything which you would see in a primary school. There is a science that we have when it comes to illustrations, why illustrations are what they are, etc. And we're just trying to demystify this entire concept where parents feel hesitant about it. So we have understood that sort of environment. I mean, just sharing this, do you know that the new generation will be the largest generation of the world, of in world history, and most of it will be in India. So and this generation, if you just understand, they are heavily tech supplied. They are the most educated gen, when it comes to predicting what it would be like for them. So not to scare anyone, but 90% of the kids today have held interactive devices by the age of 1. And their parents, if you look at them, they are heavy social media users. Most of the parents are living paycheck to paycheck, and the new generation, with what studies say, are prone to having 169% more debt than their parents. So there is that tremendous change in their behavior which is coming because of digitalization of finance, because of tech driven life. So we need to really understand this and be able to talk about giving this new generation life security when it comes to their life skill building. So of course, the idea is to tap into both parents and companies and to be able to solve a problem which will be there for the children of tomorrow. So we start now.
No, that's a wonderful idea. And I, being a parent, sort of relate to it at all levels. of course, it sort of resonates with the philosophy that even we have, because there is abundance of financial technology, there is abundance of loan, lending apps and those kind of platforms today. But where is the need? There is a conscious need for people to understand what they're using, and why. So it's brilliant that, start early and start as early as possible. And I feel that even though the generation today, they're exposed, but there's also this absorption power, which I notice in kids today, which is like just amazing. So that is wonderful. And once that project is ready, please send us the link, and I'd love to sort of source it out to the people who are listening, and of course in our circles as well. So Purva, we noticed that you've also had international exposure. You worked at the University of Hertfordshire in finance and investment banking. How did you sort of feel that that exposure to come out of the Indian, I wouldn't really say mindset, but that ecosystem where you go and you look at our economy from an external perspective? How has that helped shape your career? Could you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So, going overseas, it was very, very interesting for me. I met a lot of people, friends, be it colleagues, be it mentors, be it professors, and all these interactions kind of made me curious. It pushed me to learn more. And, well, when it comes to international studies, they really add to your knowledge, to your intellectual skills, to your practical skills, and to a lot of transferable skills as well. Because I think it's very research oriented curriculum. There is no one right answer. You are told to recognize your own question, your own problem, be it, a structured problem or an unstructured problem, and then be able to drive your own quest to be finding alternative answers, and then be able to apply that to real life, and then be able to analyze it with data, with public information, and then develop your own argument, your own assumptions. So that sort of learning requires you to deep dive into many theories, many models, many principles in finance, whether it's related to investment banking or economics or financial markets or accountancy or econometrics. I was also exposed to a lot of statistical techniques or computing softwares. So I mean, finance is a vast subject, and to be able to swim into that ocean, you need to learn how to manage time, how to manage your own learning, how to plan that. And the best thing that you learn is how do you communicate your arguments, whether it's in writing or it's in presentations or it's about using certain softwares or IT infrastructure effectively. So point kind of comes out that finance is vast, and one of the key learnings that you need to take is that there are various stakeholders in that ecosystem of finance, and they have their own individual influence, which I think I also wrote a blog post on LinkedIn during my time in university, which spoke about how finance ecosystem has financial hubs across the world, which is something I learned when I went abroad to study. That is because these hubs are strategic locations. Let's say they are also stock exchange leadership. They are about some leading institutions and their homes, or let's say concentration of certain type of organization infrastructure, let's say banks or insurance in a hub. So like for example, if I have to explain London is a trade and business center where you have bond trading. It's home to the largest stock exchange in Europe. So it's actually the location for gold and silver wholesale trading. So that's why London is famous. But if you're a person who is interested, let's say, in deep capital markets, then you should look at Singapore. Singapore is where you have your leading insurance and wealth management sector, which is fueled by exports and rapid in industrialization. Whereas if you talk about in New York, it's in the same finance ecosystem space, but it's the capital of, let's say, world finance. It's home to Wall Street. You have NYSE there. You have the largest and the finest companies. Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies listed on that stock exchange. It's like the largest when it comes to market cap. And then you have the biggest banks in New York, right? You have Morgan Stanley, you have your Goldman Sachs, your JP Morgan, everybody sitting up there. But when you talk about a Hong Kong, it's totally opposite, because that's where you have most of your banking institutions, a lot of fund management companies. It's kind of a best route if you want to access China. And then, there's Chicago with derivative trading and options. There's Tokyo, where, it's headquarters for a lot of companies. Zurich, on the other hand, is famous for asset management companies, or let's say low tax regime. That's why a lot of assets are placed there. So point for me to understand when it came to looking at world finance coming out of the Indian context was to understand that how this template is running. It's like a body where, every city has their own part to play. So that is something very important, and that's something that I learned as a global professional, and that's where you understand where you want to be, why you want to be, where your network should be. uh, so that sort of learning, I think, is when you step out of your own comfort zone. That's when you start seeing the larger picture.
No, that's brilliant. I absolutely agree with you when I say, and there are times when I'm telling people who are new to finance that their immediate question is like, where should we invest? Or like very, very prompt, like to the point answers. And then, when you tell them that there is abundance of products and depends on what you're looking for, it's fascinating because for me, again, it's a space where the more you dig, the more comes out. So that's wonderful, and thank you so much for putting that in perspective, in terms of the whole world map and how that pans out. So Purva, tell us, and you're working on that product, and you already mentioned about the challenges that debt has. What are some of the other challenges around financial literacy that you've seen in India, and of course on a broader level? Because I've realized that, like you mentioned, OECD Infi also does a lot of work in those same lines, and there are other excellence financial literacy excellence centers. But what are some of those challenges that you have seen up close and personal, some of them that you might have faced?
Absolutely. No, I've been very active in the space of financial literacy and inclusive financial literacy. I have noticed that, India has a vast digital divide, vast literacy divide, and it's difficult. Where do you start and where do you end? Financial literacy is a life skill. That's what is supposed to be underscored. That's why I think the Finlit project is something which is extremely credible, because we're not just working on one part of, literacy. It's about you being able to understand what the life is about, and it runs across strata, across backgrounds. I was actually working a few years ago with tribal children, and that time my focus was more into literacy. And at the moment, with COVID-19, I became very close to the rural migrant story, where I think adult literacy is also one of the agendas where I pledge to look into. So in my free time at the moment, I'm building that bottom up. So I'm working with a grassroots organization and then patching them up with international organizations like, Women in Tech, etc., to be able to minimize that digital divide, that literacy divide. And yeah, I often speak to young people as well. Luckily, I've spoken to a few people in undergraduate colleges, and all I tell everybody about financial literacy is that you need to be able to empower your own education curve. Whether it's, I think last week I was at an alumni meet in my own university speaking to the current cohort, and all I would had to say was that, you really need to be extremely proactive. You need to empower yourself, and I think that empowerment comes by the power of asking. So don't hesitate to ask. Ask what, take, and then once you ask, you take charge of it. So ask for advice, ask for mentorship, ask for learning, ask for a raise when it comes to, women and not being able to do that. Ask for opportunities, and once you do ask, really act on it. Walk your talk. That is something you really have to do. So financial literacy, I think it's all about empowerment, to be able to empower
No,
yourself.
that's a very powerful thought. I loved it when you said empower your own education curve. And I'm going to put it as the tagline for this post because that is so beautiful and so underrated. I'm really telling you, there are so many times when people would without a doubt go and pick up objects they don't even need, and buy them just for the sake of it. And yet at the same time, if you tell them, this is something which is going to empower your own being, they're very, very conscious about that. So that is something that even we aspire to change, and we sort of want to elevate the whole concept of financial literacy, not just in terms of consumption, but it's just about opening a bank account or something like that, but also to nuance life skills, which are even more important now because we've sort of evolved from where we were 30 years ago. So that is wonderful, and that is such a delightful, thought to have. So you sort of work with a lot of entrepreneurs in your PA advisory as well, Purva. Do you notice that there are some key financial challenges that women entrepreneurs face, from time and again, and being a woman in finance? What are your recommendations? How do you sort of advise people to go down that route?
So, fortunately, I have worked in organizations where I think organizations are very well aware of being able to have a women balance when it comes to the floor, right? And I think most MNCs are conscious about it. But what I notice within that sector is that it's not the organization limiting you, because today I think organizations are very conscious, but it's women limiting themselves, limiting themselves in the manner that I understand that there are so many roles that you play as a woman, but if you're in your career, then you have to really empower yourself and not being, I mean, infrastructurally I'm sure organizations will empower you, but it's all about going and asking for that opportunity. It's going and asking for that raise. It's going and pushing yourself to be out of that comfort zone. So that's one place where I genuinely feel women, that's why when you look, I mean, it was a few days ago I was reading on LinkedIn, there was a post where wealth management sector, there was a conference, and I did not see not even a single lady speaker. And there are few I really look at, Edelweiss, Radhika
Radhika,
is
yeah,
doing a great job
great job. Yeah.
on speaking about women coming forward and creating women teams. It's always there, and I'm taking it like a consumer on social media, just watching what is happening. But of course, there are these questions about what is happening. That's what I'm closely now associated with women in tech as well. And we will soon be launching a chapter in India. It's there in like 20 countries. And it's all about bringing women forward. I was in London, my career involved learning a lot of new technologies, AI, ML, and all of this for me is something which is happening action packed. But when you come and speak to people here, and especially women, they think it's like a distant dream. So for me, the concept for women is to really, really have self motivation when it comes to their own place and awareness in all the roles in their life. So it's just not career. I think for a woman, there are so many facets. So you need to really, really empower yourself there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I would agree. There are times where women sort of just, are scared to take that first step, I think sometimes. So that sort of, and that is what we have to change, I think. That whole more women coming out and speaking about it. And Radhika definitely is an inspiration for all of us. But I do agree, I saw that post too. And in my head, the same thought sort of passed, where are we? We are in 2021 already, and what is happening? But yeah, thank you. And one of the final questions that I have for you, Purva, is how do you see the global private equity landscape in the coming years? And how do you think it's going to impact, because there's a lot of impetus on being Atmanirbhar and, launching your own. Even there was impetus on the one-person companies in yesterday's budget. So how do you see the whole global PE landscape is going to transform the way Indian startups work?
Well, on the macro level, if I speak about private capital, it's growing. I mean, it has a long-term patient view about the world, about the cycles. So there are a lot of good management in companies that they're trying to implement, and you would see that there's a reduction in public companies that we saw. So diversification is a strategy that you will see investors going with. So they're trying to broaden their own horizon. And in terms of where the money is going, then of course tech centric approach has been the center with pandemic. Companies are also looking at institutionalizing their efforts when it comes to financing, operations, sourcing, growth management, all of these things within their portfolio companies as well. And recently you will see that the IPO market is getting active. M&A market is coming back after that pandemic pause. And hot sectors, of course, none to say, fintech, software, anything to do with health, healthcare, pet care as well. You would see that buyers are aggressive, they're opportunistic, and then there is also a growth of SPACs, which you will note, which is booming. Some say that it's a bubble, but I think it's a very valid way to expand your product offerings. And whether it's, putting up an IPO, or it's about putting or selling your SPAC, the company is going public. So when it comes to India context, the PE market in India is a great growth story. I mean, tax reforms with that Mauritius, Singapore, DTA, in fact, even the insolvency and bankruptcy code, or controlling stakes in FDI, it's a good landscape that India has come up with. And I think the Reliance PE game was like something that was exemplary. It just
Yeah,
tells you that, deal sizes are increasing every day in India. And India is actively being highlighted at the moment for impact investing, be it in social impact investing, or environment impact investing. The startup system in India, I think it's growing rapidly. It's growing to be able to tap a lot of PE aid. And I mean, I can see that, startups are using it to scale, to expand. And, for sure, private equity in particular really likes mature numbers. They, like mature scale, and they're looking at large stakes, uh, especially in the tech environment, where I think you will see a lot of LBOs also coming in. So PE firms are bullish on Indian startups, if I talk about an outside in perspective. And I mean, India will be the largest population very soon, largest young population. So those statistics really add up to the fact that, startups will be tapping into private capital. And I am for sure pro on the fact that India will have more and more unicorns coming up with how
wonderful.
the environment looks like.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, no, that is brilliant. And thank you so much for that thought, And of course, the whole Spark space, the way Burger King went public in the US versus the way it went public here, that's a beautiful comparative story. So yeah, thank you so much. One of my last questions, which I usually ask people because, finance is perceived as a boring space. But we always have our favorite books or quotes or a movie in finance which has triggered that interest. What has that been for you, Purva?
Oh, so movies and books have been a very, very interesting space for me. And they've actually been, how do I say, they've been part of my finance curve as well, my own career journey. So recently, I have been researching on mergers and acquisitions and value creation in both labor intensive industries and capital intensive industries. So a very important topic there in M&A value creation is related to shareholder value. So wherever these topics come in, I always try to go and hunt for movies and books. So if there are some people who are interested in that same area, it's worth watching this American comedy drama called Other People's Money. So it will teach you a lot about M&A, a lot about corporate governance, a lot about ESG, equity valuation. And then, if you're interested in that same area, Shareholder Value Creation by Alfred Rappaport is a great book, where you'll end up thinking that should shareholders really always come first or not. And if you are, then you pick up the debate that recently was going on in the Chicago Booth Circle, that is the classic Friedman doctrine, 15 years old, still valid in today's time with stakeholder theory coming in versus stockholder theory. Then previously in my career, I was into that risk advisory space. So for all those professionals who are into accountancy, or are in that financial reporting, who have like balance sheets and income statements in their mind, you should not miss out on it's actually a book and a movie both, which is called Enron, the smartest guys in the room. And a quote there which I really like is, did you spot that they didn't publish a quarterly balance sheet? So yeah, so if you're one of those kinds who were like me, who really like corporate finance and asset-backed securities or CDS or something like this, it would be nice to watch this movie called Too Big to Fail. It's again a theory in finance as well, which just means that certain corporations or certain financial institutions, they just become so big, so interconnected, that it's like a disaster for them to fail. And that's where governments come in to rescue their potential failure. And then this entire game of bailouts begin. So it's kind of a very valid conversation to have now, very soon,
Oh, yeah.
with a lot of economies being struck by the financial recession. So yeah, I mean, there's so many books, so many movies also. Inside
Yeah.
Job, Big Shot. It's like these are classics if you want to go in and watch. And hopefully, anybody who is watching these movies or books will be able to spark an interest in finance. So I hope
Yeah.
that helps.
No, that definitely helps. Thank you so much for mentioning Too Big to Fail, because a lot of times when you watch them and then you go back and learn a little bit more in finance, come back, rewatch them, it changes, it gives you a new, fresh perspective again. And that is the beauty of it. So thank you so much for mentioning those wonderful names. We're going to put some of those here in the link to the description. And thank you so much, Purva, for joining us and for your time and, telling us about this amazing work that you're doing. We look forward to staying in touch and learning more about that little side project once it's launched. And, congratulations and all the best on that. And thank you once again for your time with us.